Thank you, Heather. Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased that we have this opportunity to learn firsthand a little bit about the new AGI exit survey that has not yet been published. So I'm so pleased that Carolyn Wilson, along with Chris Keene, are going to give us a little peek into this, this wonderful project from AGI. My apologies. Please take it away, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you, Pranoti, and thank you all for joining us. Happy Friday the 13th. Next slide, Heather. Before we get into the results, I'm going to pass this over to Chris Keene to kind of lay the stage.
Thank you, Carolyn. I wanted to give a sort of a 30,000-foot view for one of the major motivations for us doing the Geoscience Student Exit Survey, and one of the reasons that we hope we can get more and more institutions engaged, and that's basically in an environment where we're being called as a community to to basically demonstrate our value. We should be in control of our own metrics, and if we're not the ones actually measuring our success, someone else is going to do it poorly. And unfortunately, I think in higher education, a lot of that's happening right now. A couple years ago, the U.S. Department of Education released the college scorecard system, which basically boils down the quality of institutions to 3 parameters. And I've been rather stunned at the number of faculty that have been unaware of this. And it's also been interesting to watch how the college scorecard results are being used actually by the institutions to make strategic decisions. We've seen institutions like Eastern Oregon actually get rid of their science across the board because it was considered high cost, and the only thing they could control was their actual cost of attendance. So there are these big strategic components, but it's also now being used as a marketing component by a number of institutions, basically looking for demonstrating their return on investment. And part of the question is what can institutions control, what can't they? Next slide, please. And so I want to make a point about this because the college scorecard I don't really think represents a very good way to measure the value of a school, and certainly the programs within. And when you look at exactly what those 3 metrics are that describes everything, it boils down to being, the first one is the average out-of-pocket cost for in-state students who receive financial aid. So it's actually a fairly narrowly defined subset. And particularly if it's a school that pulls in a large population from across the country or internationally, that cost metric is fairly narrowly defined, and probably in most cases is an actual underestimate of the cost. And that can certainly be helpful for a lot of institutions in their marketing. But when you look at the other components, graduation rate is actually measured by the 6-year graduation rate of first-time enrolled students. So if you happen to recruit a transfer student, they don't count. If you have a student who transfers out, even say if you're at a small regional institution, you have a student that goes on to bigger and better things, maybe gets into MIT or Berkeley or something, hits the big time, you don't get credit for that. That's actually considered a failure. So that's sort of, it's unfortunate that those kinds of metrics are played in. And finally, and this is where the big return on investment is brought forward, is the median earnings 10 years after graduation of students who received financial aid, federal financial aid, and also remained in state after graduation. So if your institution happens to service a local community and most of the students stay in the community, then it's probably a pretty fair measure. But if your institution has a very broad population that comes in and moves out and moves around globally, or perhaps your institution is positioned to help launch students into the bigger economy, then this obviously can be a negative because those students aren't necessarily counted, and it gives a lot of preference to places like, say, an MIT that has strong regional incubator culture. A lot of the students stay in the Boston area, for instance, and develop new companies or work for high-flying organizations. So these are pretty poor measures, I think, in the end. And if you're dealing with administrators who are using these kinds of factors and how this plays to the general public as a decision metric, one of the things that we're hoping is the things like the exit survey would allow you as an institution to come or as a department to go to your institution and say, look, we really are measuring how we're doing. This is how it really plays out, and these are the impacts, and this is what the value that everyone returns. So that's one of the big motivations by AGI to try to drive through this student exit survey and really want to try to continue ramping up participation. So, and with that, I'll hand it over to Carolyn, who will get into the details.
Thank you, Chris. So just to reiterate, this is your survey. This came out of discussions back in 2009 by faculty members that wanted to know more about student success in their department, in their program, and what they did after graduation. And so the survey was developed based on conversations with faculty members, with department representatives, and amongst us at AGI on how to best develop something that can look at student preparation, educational background, the experiences they have during their degree, and then what their immediate plans are after graduation. So it's been running for 5 years. This is the 5th year that we have been collecting data. And it's starting to provide some insights that are directing conversations related to program success. And we'll get into that as we go through the data. But I do want to point out that I am starting to see a decline in response rate, which is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation. Not only am I presenting the 2016-2017 academic year results, this is also a chance to share with all of y'all the general trends we're seeing over the past 5 years, and to see how we can develop this survey moving forward and keep it relevant and useful for all interested parties in this survey. So for 2017, I had 513 responses, 419 from bachelor's graduates, which is up from last year, 58 master's graduates, and 36 doctoral graduates. And those two numbers are a bit down from previous years. Next slide. So I just want to point out that these results are very preliminary. The survey actually closed at the beginning of September for the academic year, so I could catch students at fall graduation, spring graduation, and summer graduation points. So I've only had a couple weeks to really go through it and see the trends that are there and prepare something to present. So moving forward, please don't share or use these graphs beyond this conversation. I'll be putting out a report that goes into all the results in the next couple of months, and that will be shareable beyond this discussion. Next slide. So for 2017, again, we saw a pretty good distribution across the country of institutions where students were graduating that participated in the survey. As usual, a high number of students came from Texas, California, Washington, Massachusetts. So this is a pretty typical distribution. There are a couple of states that we did not get responses from that we usually do, but those that kind of fluctuation has happened each year. The pie chart is the distribution of respondents from the various types of institutions. This is based on the Carnegie classification system. And just to go through, BAC A and S is arts and science baccalaureate institutions. Master's colleges are institutions that tend to have their highest degree at the master's level. Diverse are also baccalaureate institutions, but are in a slightly different category based on the degrees that they offer. And then we have doctoral universities, R1, R2, R3. So the 3 different categories of doctoral universities that for the classification. Most of our students Most of our student graduates do come from R1 institutions, but we do have a large number of arts and science institutions and master's colleges that that participate in the exit survey as well. Next slide. So from this cohort, 82% we're completing a bachelor's degree, 11% we're completing a master's degree, and 7% we're completing a doctoral degree. As I said earlier, those percentages are a little bit lower than what the distribution we usually get, but all the trends that I saw in 2017 are pretty similar to what we've seen for the past 4 years. So the changing in percentages didn't actually change what we saw in the overall trends. The gender distribution all 5 years has been close to 50-50. Each year there's some fluctuation from year to year and between degrees, but it hovers close to the 50-50 distribution. However, we've recognized the need to open up the gender question to become more inclusive, and so we are starting to allow for gender identity to be identified, and so that's why we have a small percentage of non-binary or non-conforming students. Next slide. Here we have pie charts. The top 3 pie charts are the citizenship status of the graduates, and the bottom 3 are the race ethnicity of the graduates. I will say that only U.S. citizens and permanent residents answered the race and ethnicity question because those categories are only meant for U.S. citizens. Each country has slightly different categories to look at race and ethnicity, and so it's not really fair to ask non-permanent residents to try to identify a race and ethnicity for what's tied to our country citizenship. Again, these trends are pretty typical. What we've seen over the past 5 years. Majority of our participants are U.S. citizens, although the percentage of non-permanent residents does increase pretty dramatically when you get to the doctoral level. There is some concern that that percentage might change, thanks in part to the political climate that we're dealing with and some of the issues that we may be dealing with allowing students to come into the United States. And then for race and ethnicity, these percentages haven't changed very much either. The majority of our students are Caucasian, and the percentage of underrepresented minorities, which includes African Americans, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Hispanic Latinos, tends to be around the 7 to 12 range for bachelor's graduates and master's graduates, and we tend to see very little underrepresented minorities in doctoral graduates, so we didn't see any this year. The slice of unknown has increased over time. We've been seeing more and more students unwilling to provide their demographic information, which I find interesting, and I'm not quite sure if that's something that we want to be mindful of, if there's a different way to phrase the questions, or it's just a part of how we go about identifying ourselves now. Next slide. We did start adding, 2 years ago, we did start adding a question related to the highest education level of the graduate's parent or guardian for multiple reasons. One, looking at parents' education level can indicate the socioeconomic status of the student, and we can start looking at the percentage of graduates that are first-year college students. The one that's category named percentage, I apologize, it's not applicable like the other light blue pie slices for the master's degree, just to clarify. So what we've seen for the past 3 years is the majority of graduates have at least one parent with a bachelor's or bachelor's degree or a graduate or professional degree. And the slice of students that with parents with no college experience has tended to stay within that 5 to 10% range. The pie slice that represents some college experience includes associate's degree graduates and people who have had at least 1 year of college. We've been really working in conversations about if we want to increase diversity in the geosciences, where to focus that conversation. And one of the ways we want to move forward focusing that conversation is looking at the first generation college students. We feel like if we focus on helping those students transition into college and become successful in college and towards their degree, that is one way to help increase diversity in the geosciences. Next slide. So I do ask them at what point did they decide to major in the geosciences. In general, the majority of graduates chose to major in the geosciences during their first or second undergraduate year. Those students that chose to graduate or chose to major in the geosciences before they began college, before they began their undergraduate degree, many of them cite explanations like they have family or friends that have been in the geosciences and have been exposed to it, or they did something outdoors that was very interesting to them. Whereas those that decide to major in their first or second undergraduate year tend to mention professors or coursework or course-related activities that encourage them to major in the geosciences. I haven't coded the reason for majoring responses for this year, but I would expect them to be fairly similar to what we've seen for the past 4 years. Next slide. We asked them if they've had any high school exposure to earth and environmental sciences, and about half, approximately half, is a little high in the doctoral, amongst the doctoral graduates this year, but approximately half have taken some sort of course in earth, environmental science, geography, etc. So they have had some exposure to it before starting their degree, but like I said, many of them decide to major in that first or second undergraduate year. I think this shows that, unsurprisingly, all of our geoscience graduates have an inherent interest in the subject area, but it may not be the push that gets them to decide to major. It's these other factors that push them into the major. Over the past 4 years, we've seen about a quarter of our bachelor's and master's graduates have attended a 2-year college for at least 1 semester. And this is another area that we at AGI are kind of interested in, is helping with the successful transition of 2-year college students into 4-year programs. Diversity tends to be higher at 2-year colleges, but they also face very different challenges once they in that transfer process from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. For example, dealing with the transferable courses, in speaking with 2-year college professors who have tried to help their students transfer into 4-year programs for geoscience. Sometimes they have to retake classes once they get to the 4-year institution, or they have to take some supplementary courses in math and chemistry before they can really get into the degree, which extends their time in college. And another issue is that a lot of 2-year colleges are non-traditional students, and so they're dealing with different pressures in their life that can affect their schooling than maybe students that started out at a 4-year institution. So along with looking at first-generation college students, looking at 2-year college students that are transferring into four-year institutions are another way to, if we help them through succeed in the geosciences, another way to maybe increase diversity in the geosciences. Next slide. Something that that we've seen over the past 5 years and it hasn't changed is the quantitative skills and knowledge of our graduates. The majority of graduates take up to Calculus 1 and Calculus 2, but then the percentage of participation in higher quantitative courses beyond Calc 2 begins to drop pretty quickly, particularly among bachelor's and master's students. And we've been looking at this graph, and it hasn't changed over the past 5 years. And so some of our discussions we've had with faculty and administrators is there ways to shift the curriculum to encourage more math, or what can we do to encourage taking some of these courses? For doctoral students, we're particularly concerned about statistics. We would like to see a higher percentage of students completing a statistics course before graduation. Next slide. What we're seeing too, though, is that sometimes the course availability or the course participation can depend on the type of institution that the student is at. So, for example, if you look at Calculus 3, the red bar, 40% of students that attended baccalaureate arts and sciences institutions, liberal arts institutions, took Calculus 3, whereas about 15% of students that went to master's colleges took Calc 3. And the highest percentage of students from Calculus 2 onward are students that attended Research 1 institutions. So there may be quite some differences in the encouragement of certain quantitative courses based on the type of institution the students are attending. Next slide. So the next few slides are going to go through participation in field experiences, research experiences, and internships, because we think these are three key opportunities and experiences that students should be participating in to prepare them for the workforce and for success in their degree. So we ask about field experiences, and we break that into 3 different categories. And we define a field camp as an intensive 4 to 6 week program where they're out in the field learning field skills and working on projects such as mapping and so forth. We then ask about field courses, which is where half of the course time is spent out in the field learning and practicing field skills. And the third being any other field experiences such as field trips and short trips like that out in the field that don't necessarily fit under the field camp or field course categories. We've talked to employers since the start of this survey, and many employers have impressed upon us the importance of developing those field skills before they complete their degree, before entering the workforce. And over the past few years, we have seen a strong participation in field camp and in other field experiences. Nearly every single student takes a field experience of some sort. This year in particular, we saw an increase in participation at field camp at all levels. So these percentages are a little bit higher than what we've seen in the past. And the percentage of bachelor's graduates that plan to attend field camp but haven't yet, that's decreased some this year as well. Usually it's around 20 to 25%, and now it's down to about 15% this year. Accessibility to field camp has become an interest of ours over the years. And if you go to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. We've noticed that participation in field camp can vary by institution type as well, and so we have started looking into programs and departments that offer field camps, and if they have open enrollment, and have started including that in the directory of geoscience departments as a way to help students find field camp opportunities if their institution doesn't offer one. But as you can see, while field camps tend to be, participation in field camps tends to happen more R1 institutions and less at liberal arts colleges, everybody offers field experiences, and nearly every student participates in at least one before graduation. Next slide. When we ask about research experiences, we ask them how many they've participated in, if they've worked with a professor on their research, if they've done individual research, and the kind of methods they've used for their individual research. And I'm just going to show you this one slide of participation in research experiences. Nearly everybody participates in at least one research experience. However, we would like to see, right now we have about 20% of bachelor's graduates that say they do not participate in a research experience before graduation. We'd like to see that percentage drop. We recognize the importance of these kind of experiences for critical thinking skills, problem solving, and being able to really implement some of the skills and knowledge gained during the program, and to be able to demonstrate their ability to do geoscience research. And so we would like to see higher participation amongst bachelor's graduates in research experiences. Next slide. However, something that's incredibly concerning, at least to me, is the low percentage of internship participation. These percentages have fluctuated a little bit, but we see between 60 to 70% of bachelor's graduates over the past 5 years that have not participated in an internship before graduation, and about 50 to 60 doctoral graduates that have not participated in an internship. Master's students do recognize the importance of internships because they're trying to get out in the workforce as quickly as they can upon completing their degree. But I still think that 42% is a little high amongst master's graduates that have not participated in an internship. And you might be wondering why we're concerned about doctorates, but I've been hearing a lot of doctoral students talking about concerns about going into academia and unsure if that's where they want to go. And for any student going out into the workplace and seeing what's going on a day-to-day basis in the field that they're interested in is really important to understanding day-to-day dynamics and how to work within the organizations that and industries that are open to geoscientists. And so we would really like to see more participation in internships. Next slide. So we found these percentages to be concerning, and so with that, we started asking a few other questions, one of them being, all right, so how many internship applications have you submitted? Thinking that there might be, it might be that students are applying and just not getting those internships, but it turns out over half of the students that didn't do an internship amongst bachelor's graduates and doctoral graduates also did not submit an internship application. And so trying to figure out where the disconnect is and trying to promote opportunities so that students can have internship-like experiences and know what they're getting into when they enter the workforce is something that we're really interested in. Next slide. I also asked them about financial aid. Most students do take some form of financial aid, and I bring this up to make a couple of points. First, with student loans, I mean, nearly 40% of master's graduates in 2017 and 12% of doctoral graduates took student loans. So not all students are fully funded for their degree, and I think most people think that that's the case, particularly in graduate programs, but it's really not. So these students are having to borrow money so that they can complete their degree, and that puts pressure on them as they finish school to make sure that they can get a job and be able to start paying off those loans. Another point to make is this year we saw a drop in the percentage of doctoral graduates that had department scholarships and institutional scholarships. Usually that percentage is 10 to 20% higher. And so it dropped this year, and it may be an artifact of having a low N for doctoral graduates that took the survey, but I know I've heard from departments that there's just less and less money to pass out in some cases. Next slide. So the last couple of slides are looking at what their their immediate future plans were after graduation. So 31% of bachelor's graduates were immediately planning to go into graduate school, and 35% of master's graduates were going to go back in for another graduate degree. This percentage has fluctuated between in previous years 38% to 42%, so it dropped this year than it had in previous years. However, it increased among master's graduates, because in the past few years it's fluctuated between 20 and 27%, but then it jumped up to 35% in 2017, which was interesting. We do have students that decide to pursue areas outside of the geosciences, such as law degrees, medical degrees, and then other fields such as chemistry and engineering. However, many of these, and education, although many of these fields do have a connection back to geoscience, and there's very likely a plan to make a connection back to their geoscience knowledge. Next slide. So when I looked at the students that either found a job in the geosciences at the point of graduation or were still looking, we saw 11% of bachelor's graduates, 31% of master's graduates, and 30% of doctoral graduates had found a job at the point of graduation in a geoscience industry. But 47% of bachelor's graduates, 47% of master's graduates, and 58% of doctoral graduates were still looking for a job. This is actually a decrease amongst master's and doctoral graduates that found jobs at the point of graduation, and it's been kind of a decreasing trend. 31% is a new low amongst master's graduates that have found a job, and the doctoral graduate percentage has dropped from 70% in 2014 that found a job at the point of graduation to now 36% in 2017. So we're seeing a decrease in recent graduates' ability to obtain a job immediately at the point of graduation. Next slide. While I don't have pie charts yet of the industries that are hiring graduates, these were the industries that hired the most graduates within each degree field. We did see a drop actually in the number of master's graduates that were hired by oil and gas, even though it was still the top hiring industry for master's graduates. The number had dropped. But environmental services is still the main industry hiring bachelor's graduates at the point of graduation, and four-year institutions and research institutions hiring doctoral graduates. Many of those are likely postdoc positions. I haven't yet looked at the data on those graduates that have found jobs outside of the geosciences, but we also typically ask them to briefly tell us why they picked a job outside of their degree field, and so I'm kind of interested to see what those responses are. Typically they, the graduates talk about needing to pay off loans and needing money immediately, or taking a break, or having trouble finding a job, and so taking on something else to while they continue to search for jobs in the geosciences. But I'm curious to see what they say this year. Next slide. And then for those students or those graduates that did find a job at the point of graduation, we asked them about the resources they used to find geoscience jobs. And I bring this up because I want to point your attention to faculty referral. The highest percentage of bachelor's graduates depended on and were successful based on a faculty referral. So faculty are very important and influential for students to be successful in finding a job as they're graduating. For master's and doctoral graduates, in 2017, it was job searches. In previous years, master's graduates have been very successful at campus recruiting events and job fairs, but that wasn't the case for 2017. Next slide. All right, so those are some of the trends we're seeing in 2017 and some of the things that we've seen over the past 5 years. And so we've been doing this for 5 years, and the results we're seeing are starting to shape some of our initiatives and creating new initiatives. And so these are some of the things that we are doing that where the exit survey results have been very helpful or help kind of guiding the question. So we have a program called the Geoscience Online Learning Initiative in partnership with AIPG. And so it provides online courses and continuing education credits that are based in coursework related to the geosciences and developing working skills for the geosciences. But there has been discussions of are there some of these supplemental courses and supplemental areas that we should be investigating to put into the GOLI system. So some of these areas where students and recent graduates are feeling a bit deficient can go and do that are tied to the geosciences without it being a particular specific workforce skill, technical skill. We've also started having discussions about graduate program success. What are the ways that that we can measure success for graduate programs, and how successful are students after they finish their graduate degree? The exit survey has really increased the conversation on supporting the transition of two-year college students into four-year universities. And I've actually worked with a few two-year college professors on investigating some of the challenges that these students face when they transfer into a four-year university and as they work towards graduation. Next slide. Something that I will be presenting at GSA and AGU is a quick investigation of the early career workforce. So I followed up with former exit survey participants and asked them about their career history, their job history to this point. And these are all early career geoscientists that graduated within the past 4 or 5 years. So it's kind of looking at that. Really the first investigation exploring into that early career workforce area, and particularly asking about what skills and knowledge they've developed after graduation, and what do they wish they knew when they finished, now that they've entered the workforce, that they could have worked on during while they were still in their educational program. And I'm seeing answers like coding and programming is coming up a lot amongst these early career workforce. They wish they had had more programming and coding skills. Statistics has come up quite a bit. There's been some very specific geoscience skills that they wish they had learned. And I'm seeing a lot of, I wish there had been some sort of career development or internship-like opportunities, so I would have some idea of what the workforce was like before entering it. So those are the kind of responses that I'm seeing. It's very interesting. Please come by my poster for a bit more investigation on that particular survey. Also, the internship issue has led to discussions with Pranoti at AGU and also our scholar at AGI to investigate former AGI and AGU interns and quickly ask about their experiences and how their internship may have shaped their career paths to this point. And so we will be presenting a poster at AGU on that information. And then finally, we've been looking at field camp structure, and if there's if field camp has evolved somewhat from what we consider the traditional definition of field camp. And so in that investigation, I've been collecting or I've been having institutions and faculty members submit their syllabus for their field camp, and we're going through each syllabus and looking for similarities and differences and kind of looking at the field camp structure. And hopefully we'll have some results from that coming out pretty soon. Next slide. But I do want to reiterate that this is your survey. This came out of discussions with faculty members that wanted to know more about their students and their recent graduates. Because we're at a 5-year point, I put forward these 3 questions to you. Are there any new questions we should be investigating? What other areas should we be looking into? Am I asking the wrong things, or are we no longer interested in some of the things that I'm asking about? How do we encourage continued participation? I would like to see my participation rates go up, and I have a few theories on why they've gone down, but nothing to really back that up. But we want to encourage continued participation and continued yearly participation from departments instead of participating 1 year and then taking a couple of years off and then participating again. And then finally, I'm curious how you measure student success for your departments. Is there something related to that that we should be asking amongst these graduates? Next slide. So I'm going to finish talking and start answering your questions. You can find past annual exit survey reports at our reports page. The 2017 report, like I said, will hopefully be out in the next couple of months. And you can email me anytime if you have any questions, and I'll pass it back to Heather.
Great. Thank you so much for that lovely presentation, Carolyn. We do have a couple of questions rolling in, which is exciting. The first, there seems to be some disparity between internship experiences and field camp experiences. How are these defined on the survey?
That's a good question. Well, so we view field experiences, research experiences, and internship experiences as 3 separate things. And so field experiences, like I said, we define field camp as that intensive 4 to 6 week course done through a department with a professor, learning out in the field, learning field skills. We view internships, and we've had discussions about this because usually I get asked about the difference between internships and research experiences and REs. But we view internships as an opportunity in an office or with an organization that is not necessarily tied to an academic department. So you're not working with a faculty member. You're working with a person that works in the geosciences every day in their office, and it's different because you're moving away from your department and your academic program, and you're working, you're in an actual working office. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And if Jessica has a follow-up question with that, feel free to raise your hand or write out another question. So we have another participant who says, in Texas, I believe that the lack of a solid earth science and geology curriculum in the public schools impacts the number of students who choose this as a major in college. Did your study ask where the respondent went to elementary school through high school, and if the respondent had an earth science class, and if so, did that impact his or her decision to go into our profession?
That's a good question. So we don't quite get that detailed, but I do know where the participants went to high school, so I can tie back the high school course participation to the location of their high school. So I haven't done that yet, but I can and look at those students that did take an earth or environmental course in high school, which state they were enrolled in high school.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. One of our participants says that she was struck by the numbers of students who have already decided that they were going to be a geoscience major. Do you know if they come from four-year schools or from a research institution? Maybe you've analyzed that. Or do you know anything about like the geographic distribution of those who have already decided to be geoscience majors?
So I'm assuming she's talking about the high percentages of graduates that had decided to be geoscientists before beginning their college degree. I haven't I haven't investigated beyond the degree field, but that would be interesting to look at other areas and see if there's other demographic or locationary trends related to that particular question.
Okay, awesome. Now, do you have any information about the connection between states where the NGSS has been truly integrated, and if that has played a role on students deciding to major in the geosciences?
That's something that I've thought about, but again, the rollout of this survey and its development over the past few years has also been the same time that NGSS has rolled out and has started to be adopted, and so I think that's something that we could consider in a future iteration of this survey, but we'd have to be very very careful about how we phrase that question, because I'm not sure. I don't know if students recognize the they could recognize if they are part of an NGSS curriculum or not. That's something that we could would really have to go. We'd have to ask teachers, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Let's see, what other questions? What types of jobs are the people with the bachelor's degrees getting within the four-year institutions and universities? Do you know?
I haven't looked closely at that. A lot of times it's technician jobs. Sometimes they count having a job if they've been if they've been given a teaching assistantship.
Okay.
So it's lab technicians or like teaching assistantship or research assistantship type positions usually.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, do you have any folks, or is there any measure of people wanting to be high school teachers? Does that ever come up in your data?
It does, and I don't have a clear answer for 2017. One of the issues that we face is that the definition of geosciences is not a common definition, and let me explain. Some people view geoscience and the geoscience workforce as very geology, oil and gas, energy related. AGI takes a broader definition of geosciences. We include atmospheric sciences, oceanography, planetary sciences, and we also take a wide, broad view as far as industries go. And so, for example, with education, we do have quite a few students that that get jobs in educational programs and as teachers in K-12 programs, but they consider themselves outside the geosciences when they take that job posting. And so, like I said, I haven't looked at the graduates that found jobs outside the geosciences, but every year there's a handful of students that go into K-12 teaching that put themselves there, even though they are teaching science and probably teaching earth science, and should be within the geosciences category.
Okay, excellent. Now, you've done the survey for a number of years, and you mentioned something about how recently you have seen some of the numbers decline in terms of your participation rates. What are your strategies, and what were your strategies initially for recruiting folks to participate, and have they changed over time, or what do you anticipate to do to try to get these numbers up again?
That's a good question. So to encourage departments to participate, we actually give them back the data in aggregate, but they have to have 3 or 4 students actually take the survey so that there is a little bit of data hiding when we provide the aggregated data. And so that's been kind of the incentive for departments to participate. However, some of the smaller departments have trouble getting participation, and large departments send out the request for students and recent graduates to take the survey, but don't necessarily get the participation that they're expecting. For example, I have one faculty member who emails me every year asking why she hasn't received her aggregate data, and it's because while she comes from a large institution, they only get 1 or 2 students from that from their department taking the survey. we did, to help increase numbers, bring in a handful of geoscience societies that are part of our federation to send the survey link to their student membership, and that has helped increase numbers or keep numbers steady as department participation has declined a bit. I am trying to think of new ways to encourage participation, but I am very dependent on my representatives of the departments that hand it out to their students, because if I sent all the geoscience graduates an email, it would largely get ignored because many of them may not know who AGI is as an organization, and they definitely don't know me. I feel like we do get better response rates when the request for participation comes from a faculty member from their department. We have seen good success when faculty members give it out in capstone courses or throw a pizza party and encourage student participation, but it fluctuates. But I do think one of the things that's leading to decreased participation is tied with the declining percentage of graduates finding a job at graduation. There might be less incentive to take an exit survey asking about their career plans if they don't have any.
Right. Well, hopefully we can get those participation rates up. And
yeah, if you have any suggestions, let me know.
Right, exactly, especially for incentivizing the students to participate, because like you said, it's probably lack of awareness of who AGI is and why this is important.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are really good points. Now, is there a large disproportion in the geosciences of male and female graduates? I think that you said earlier that it was about 50-50 who take your survey.
It's about 50-50. I mean, it fluctuates a little bit year to year and from degree to degree, but it hovers about 50-50, and it has all 5 years that we've been collecting this data through this survey. And I will say that for those of y'all that don't receive them, we put out what we call Geoscience Currents, which are short one-pagers, and we put them out about monthly. And I just released one last month that showed that the workforce is starting to transition to be more to see more equality gender-wise. So I think the graduation, the recent graduation rates of about a 50-50 gender split is starting to move out into the workforce as well.
Okay, great. It looks like we might have a hand raised by one of our colleagues, Jennifer Nocerino. I'm going to unmute you, Jennifer, and see, because I don't think your question came through. Jennifer, you can go ahead and talk if you have a microphone. Hi, Jennifer, we can hear you.
Hi. I did not have a question, so I'm not sure why that came through.
Okay, that's okay. Well, I thought I'd give you a chance to speak anyway.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay. So we have another question that came in. In terms of participation, are you contacting the student affiliations of the geological societies at the schools?
I'm sorry. Say that again. Oh, like
the student-led chapters, exactly those. Have you considered contacting those for participation?
I haven't, but it's something I can that I can explore and look into, or have my my colleagues at the societies that represent those student chapters help me out with that. So that's an interesting idea. I want to make sure that the people that are taking this survey are graduating, and so that's one of the reasons why I've been sticking mostly to department representatives, so they're sending it to the right students. I have had students try to take the survey in the past that are still working on their degree, really confused on the questions I was asking.
Yeah, I could imagine. Now, do you think, since you are asking them to take the survey right before graduation or right around that time, do you think that the students are just overwhelmed with all their other obligations and trying to finish up school, and for the graduate students finishing their theses and dissertations, do you think that plays a role in the participation rates?
I do. I do.
Okay.
So we keep the survey open for a couple of months at each graduation point and try to send out reminders multiple times, because I recognize that they have a lot of requests on their time at that time.